Pastor's Corner teaching series. In this series, we're going through the book of James chapter by chapter, verse by verse. It's just for your own personal Bible study, maybe your family Bible study, or even your small group. So today, for us, we're landing in James chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. James chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them. Let me start off first here. James calls us to listen. He says, now listen. It's kind of just, let me get your attention on this. Hey, pay attention to this specifically. And he goes on to say, today, tomorrow, we'll go to this city or that city. We'll spend this amount of time here. We'll carry on business and we'll make money. And what he's really getting at is, how many of us in our lives, how many times do we really include God in our plans? And the reality is, for most of us, we exclude God from our plans. We make the plans ourselves. And somewhere down the line, we ask God, bless my plan. I think of sometimes when I would talk with young people, I say, well, what's your future plan going to look like? And they say, well, I'm going to achieve this amount of marks so that I can get into this university, so that I could get this degree, so that I could get this job and make enough money so that I can live in this particular city, to get this particular sized house, to then marry this particular person, and to have X amount of dollars in my bank account. And while I'm a person who likes to plan, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that plan, but what I'm worried about sometimes is, where is God in that plan? When we've planned out everything in our lives, oftentimes we've cut God out of those plans. Oftentimes we will start with, here's what I want to do, here's the ways I'm going to do it, and then we just ask God to rubber stamp it at the end and just say, bless that. Meanwhile, God sits here and saying, hello, I'm in control. You can't do any of this without me. In fact, this whole COVID thing is a simple reminder, we are not in control. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. How many of us knew that 2020 would turn out to be the year that it is? How many of us knew that back in March, everything was going to shut down from schools to work and businesses? How many of us, all our plans have now changed? And in fact, because all these plans have changed, some of us are actually really angry with God for changing these plans. Some of us are really scared because we don't know what to do now because our plans have to change. The government has recently released their economic projections, and it's scary. $343 billion deficit. What are we going to do with that? And it just reminds us we are not in control. And yet we make plans. And again, there's nothing wrong with making plans, but I think James is really challenging us to say, when we make plans, are we really asking God to be a part of those plans first? Or are we making plans without God and then asking God to just simply rubber stamp it at the end? So that's something for us to think about as you look at this passage here in verses 13 and 14. And James reminds us again, we are not God. There's this expression that in my days of studying as a pastor, it was a very simple expression. God is God, I am not. God is God, I am not. And again, James reminds us, uses some of the verbiage from Ecclesiastes, that we're simply a vapor. Who are we? We're simply a vapor. We're a mist. We are not God. We are not God. And so why do we go about making plans as if we are God? Why do we go about making plans as if we know what's going to happen and we can control what will happen? And so that's a wake-up call, I think, for some of us as Christians as we struggle through this season that we have right now, but also thinking about how we make our plans. And this is not just simply how to make money plans. This is like just how we're supposed to live life. Oftentimes we go on vacations without thinking, what does God want for me to do about that? We make lunch plans without really thinking, what does God want me to really do with this? And oftentimes, again, we make these plans and we simply ask God to rubber stamp them. And maybe it's time for us to reconsider again. Instead of that home renovation, God, what do you really want me to do with my home? Instead of that travel plan of vacation, God, what do you really want me to do when I have this time off? Instead of projecting that I'm supposed to go to this university and get this job, God, what do you really want me to do with my life? Instead of saying I'm supposed to marry this person, God, how do you want me to be in a relationship that honors you? And so these are the ways in which James is really tackling this whole concept of God is God and I am not. So how are we supposed to make sure we don't fall into that trap all the time? James gives us this expression. He says, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or do that. And he uses this expression, if the Lord is willing, whatever the Lord's will may be. Now, I know that when you hear that, some of us in our way of thinking means that, oh, we're just supposed to say this as a magical speech piece or something that every Christian is supposed to say, and that would then encompass that we're doing it the right way. No, James is saying it's not just the idea of saying this, it's really, do you back it up with your actions? See, a lot of times we will do things and say things to sound like we're good Christians, but the attitude behind it is what's going to matter. So we need to trust God. We need to submit to God. We need to put our faith, hope, and trust and desires in God. We need to put our plans into God's hands and say, God, what do you want first before I make the plans? Because trials and challenges, when they come, they will really reveal our heart attitude in all of this. And so he's saying, if the Lord wills. Now, it doesn't mean that you can magically say, oh, I'm going to marry this person if the Lord wills, or I will go to this university if the Lord is willing, or I'm going to have this many children if the Lord is willing, or I will retire at this age if the Lord is willing. Yes, it's great that you say that, but he's saying, what is the attitude behind it? Do you really believe in that? Are you really going to submit to the will of God? Because the reality is this, our plans will change. Our plans will change. Things will never go as smoothly as you hope it goes. And you know what? I believe sometimes in this day and age, we have confused something of ourselves. We seem to think that we are entitled to have a smooth and easy life because we're Christians. And that is not a biblical concept. We are never entitled to a smooth and easy life. Just because we say, if the Lord wills, somehow we think that magically that gives us a smooth and easy life. No. The attitude behind it, if you really believe that it's the will of God, then no matter what the circumstance before you, you will still have a joy and contentment. That even if your plans don't go the way you plan, well, you will still see God's plans and purposes in that. I've heard of stories of people, rushing from the airport to try to get home to make it to their kid's soccer game, but their connecting flight got delayed. But then conversation, they were upset that they wouldn't get to see their kid's game, but they had a conversation with someone about Jesus Christ at the airport. Or the fact that I had all these plans, but suddenly I got sick with cancer. But then during those times of appointments and talking with doctors and nurses and meeting others in oncology, they had developed wonderful relationships to share about Jesus Christ and their own personal faith. I mean, these are all the ways in which our plans can get derailed, but these are also the ways in which we see that our plans ultimately are nothing compared to God's great plans. And so sometimes when things just don't go the way we want, it's a good time to ask, well, is it because I thought I was God and I was in control? And can we still submit to what God is doing in the midst of these new plans that seem to fall in front of us? And now James gives us something to think about in verses 16 and 17. He says, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. And if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them. Now, I think what James is really getting at here is, a lot of times when we boast about the things that are important to us, especially if they are our plans. This idea of boasting, I think it's taken on a new form. It's what we call social media. We like to show people on Instagram and on Facebook, on Twitter and on Snapchat and on TikTok. We like to show people all of our great plans, don't we? We like to show people the great plan we had for our vacation. and the beautiful vacation spot that we found. We like to show people our great plans of making this beautiful dessert and showing people the food and the recipes that we had. We have this great plan of showing people our home renovations and the before and the after pictures of all the work that we did on this. We love to show people our great plans of how we graduated and now we've got this wonderful job interview and we received employment. We have all these great plans to show people these things. And so a lot of times we're easily boasting about what we've accomplished and about what we've done. In that same way, do we really ever boast on the same category or the same level about God and what God is doing? And sometimes I think about this in our own social media life. Many of us are quick to share. We're quick to share that I watched this musical, Hamilton, let's say, and I was able to go watch it. Many of us are quick to boast and share about these plans again. But not many of us are quick to share and post about our church or something that inspired us from the scriptures or something that moved us about a testimony that we heard. Not many of us are willing to share these things. And I think that grieves myself and it also grieves God a bit, because the idea is we couldn't accomplish any of those other things in our lives without God. And yet we boast about them as if we did them. And then the things that we should be boasting about in terms of God, we don't share them and we don't post them and we don't boast about them. And I want us to consider that. I want you to consider that. I reflect on myself that when I have to consider that too. We're quick to show people the beautiful things about ourselves, but we're never quick to show people the beautiful things about God. And even worse yet, we're never quick to show people the areas in my life where I'm weak and that God has done something great, because we're all hiding behind these masks. And so I think verse 16, I just want to take that into our context today and just ask us to really think again and boast about God, not just about what we've accomplished or what we're doing, but about what God is doing and about what God is accomplishing in us. He ends off verse 17 by saying it's a sin to know good and not do something about it. And I'm going to pick that up next time when we talk about it, because I think that leads into the next section of this. But I think there's also a simple instruction there. If we know what is good and we don't do it, it's a sin. And I think that's a real challenge today, given our current circumstances and world challenges that we're facing. A lot of times we know what the right thing is to do. We know what the right thing is to say. But oftentimes lately we've remained silent on things. But again, we'll pick that up at another time. So what are we supposed to do with all this? First thing, if you would take some time to consider, am I really living for Jesus? Or am I living for myself and just asking Jesus to rubber stamp my plans? That's everything from our ideas of retirement, our ideas of where to go for university, our ideas of who we should marry, our ideas for our family, everything from our vacation plans to our home renovation plans. Are we really living for God and saying, God, what is your plan? Or am I living for myself and just asking God to rubber stamp my plans? I really want us to lean into that today and just consider that throughout our life. How can we make sure that we're living in God's plans rather than just living out our own way of doing things and asking God for the rubber stamp? The second thing I want us to consider is, how do we use what God has given us to share about God and not just about ourselves? We live in a day and age where we promote ourselves so much. And I want to invite you to consider how you can use, whether you would use your social media as a platform to share more and boast more about who God is and what God is doing. Maybe some of us are embarrassed. And if we are embarrassed, maybe we need to reconsider what is going on in our spiritual walk. Maybe some of us just don't think about it, and that's fine. We plead ignorance, but we also would then need to reconsider where we are in our spiritual walk. Some of us are purposely, we just don't want people to know this part of us, that we're Christians. And I think that's also an opportunity for us to consider, where are we in our spiritual journey? And for some of us, it's just we never knew that we could use that. So fine, let's just try to figure out ways in which we can really share about who God is and what he's all about, and to boast about that. So those are the couple of things that I hope to challenge you with this week. So again, thanks for joining us. I hope that challenges you and I hope that encourages you. We'll see you next week on our Pastor's Corner teaching series on the book of James. Love and peace.